I should have known something was wrong when he changed his cologne. It wasn't the smell of another woman on him, not yet. It was that he suddenly stopped smelling like us. Like routine, like Sunday mornings with pancakes, like movie nights on our tiny couch. Instead, he reeked of something new. Sharp. Foreign. Like secrets. My name's Rachel. I was 28, living in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I thought I was about to marry the man of my dreams. Ethan. Tall, warm, with that boyish smirk that made you feel like you were in on a joke no one else knew. We'd been together for 4 years. Met at a work conference in Atlanta. He spilled coffee on my shoes and I insulted his tie. Somehow that turned into dinner. Dinner turned into late nights. Late nights turned into a shared apartment, a dog named Scout, and a ring. I said yes in a vineyard with fairy lights in the trees and my favorite song playing. My mom cried. His mom screamed. We were planning a wedding for 150 people. I was picking centerpieces. He was picking suits. But I didn't know he was also picking someone else. It started with phone calls he wouldn't take around me. Laughter that didn't include me. A guardedness, subtle at first. Then more. Passwords changed. Plans that didn't make sense. And that new cologne, that goddamn cologne. I told myself I was just stressed. Weddings make people paranoid. My best friend, Jess, said I was overthinking it. You're just scared, she said. Cold feet. But it wasn't my feet that were cold. It was his hands, his words, his eyes. Then I found the receipt. Buried in the bottom of our shared desk drawer, the one he never used. It was for a hotel room. A suite. Booked for 2 nights. 2 weeks ago. While I was in Savannah for my bachelorette weekend. It wasn't in Charlotte. It was in Charleston. He said he was visiting his dad that weekend. His dad had a stroke last year and Ethan went every few months to check on him. I never questioned it. I loved that about him, how much he cared for his family. But that receipt didn't have his dad's name on it. It had his. And someone else's. Her name was Mara. I stared at the name like it was a foreign word I couldn't sound out. Mara. Simple. Elegant. Sharp, like the edge of a knife you didn't know was pressed against your back until it slid in. My chest felt tight. Not the kind of tight that comes with panic, but the hollow pressure of 1,000 puzzle pieces collapsing at once. I sat there frozen, the paper trembling in my hand. The receipt wasn't just proof, it was betrayal on letterhead. A date. A time. A location. His name. Her name. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just folded it neatly like it was something sacred and put it in my coat pocket. And then I stood there for a long time staring at the framed photo of us on the bookshelf. It was from last Christmas. He had his arm around me, our faces flushed from the cold, big goofy smiles that looked too damn genuine. How do you fake the kind of smile? How do you lie with your eyes like that? I waited until he came home that night. He walked in like everything was fine, kissed me on the forehead, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I swear, in that moment, he looked like a stranger wearing Ethan's skin. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I played the part of the fiancé. I asked about his day. I smiled when he touched my back. I laughed at something I didn't even hear. Because I needed to see it for myself. I needed confirmation. The receipt could have been a mistake. Maybe it wasn't that kind of hotel visit. Maybe Mara was a cousin. A colleague. A ghost from a past life. But deep down, I already knew. The next day, I called the hotel. I didn't even try to hide my voice. I gave them the reservation number and asked calmly, like I was just checking on lost earrings who had stayed in the suite. The woman on the phone hesitated. Then she said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we can't release guest information." I'm his wife, I lied, quick and cold. I think he's cheating on me. There was a pause. A breath. And then the words, "A Mr. Ethan Callahan checked in with Amara Thompson on the 14th. They checked out on the 16th. 2 nights. I hung up without saying thank you. And then I broke. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming. No plates shattered. I just sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, and let the silence eat me alive. The kind of silence that's not peaceful, it's suffocating. Like every sound you used to trust is now suspect. I didn't want to believe it. But I also couldn't pretend anymore. This wasn't just a fling. You don't bring a fling to a weekend getaway. You don't book suites and take her out of town while your fiancé is celebrating your future marriage with her closest friends. No, this was something else. This was emotional warfare. And the worst part? I still had to pretend everything was fine because the wedding was in 12 days. The days that followed were a blur of lace, lies, and late-night nausea. My wedding dress hung in the closet like a ghost. The invitations had all been sent. The caterer was confirmed. My mother called every morning with some new detail, table linens, song selections, whether Uncle Dave should be seated near the bar. I answered each call like nothing was wrong, using a voice that no longer felt like mine. I was performing a role, playing the happy bride-to-be, while inside, my heart was fraying like the hem of an old dress. And Ethan? He was flawless. That made it worse. He brought me coffee in bed. He kissed me like he meant it. He held my hand during wedding meetings and whispered things like, "I can't wait to call you my wife." It made me nauseous. Every touch, every word felt rehearsed, deliberate, a performance for an audience of one. I kept asking myself how he could lie so easily. How could he look me in the eyes and say he loved me knowing what he had done? But I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed more. Not for revenge, not then, but for understanding. For closure. For clarity. So I did the unthinkable, I followed him. He said he had a work dinner, some last-minute planning with a client downtown. I kissed him goodbye, then waited 10 minutes before grabbing my coat and keys. I didn't know what I expected to find. Maybe I hoped I'd been wrong, that he'd really be sitting at some dull business dinner and I'd feel foolish and paranoid and relieved. But no. I parked across the street from the restaurant he mentioned and waited. 10 minutes later, he walked in. Not alone. She was beautiful. Of course she was. Tall, sleek, dressed in soft beige and confidence. Her hair was dark, her smile bright and easy. They didn't kiss, but the body language was intimate. Too close. Too familiar. His hand brushed her lower back as they were seated. She laughed at something he said, tilted her head the way I used to when I was in love. I watched them from my car, frozen in place, heartbeat hammering against my ribs like it wanted to break free. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even feel sad. Just numb. Like my soul had left my body to avoid witnessing any more humiliation. I took pictures. I don't know why. Maybe for proof. Maybe to remind myself I wasn't crazy. Maybe to destroy him later. They stayed for an hour. When they left, they didn't touch, but they didn't need to. I knew what I saw. I knew what it meant. That night, I didn't sleep. I laid next to him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breath even out as he drifted into dreams I no longer belonged to. I wanted to shake him awake. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sob until my throat bled. But I didn't. Instead, I planned. Not the wedding. The ending. The next morning, I smiled at him. I kissed him back when he kissed me. I told him I loved him and it tasted like acid on my tongue. I packed his lunch for work. I asked about his meeting the night before. He lied. Smoothly. Effortlessly. Said the client was a little late but everything went well. I nodded, told him I was proud of him and watched him walk out the door like a man with nothing to hide. It was infuriating, watching him play the role of the perfect fiancé while I was drowning in knowledge he didn't know I had. But I didn't break. I refused to break, not yet. Instead, I called Jess. Jess was my best friend, my maid of honor, and the only person who could tell when I was pretending. The moment I said her name on the phone, she knew something was wrong. I told her everything, the receipt, the hotel, the woman at the restaurant. She didn't speak for a long time, just breathed heavily through the line as if absorbing the betrayal herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, dangerous. "Do you want to cancel the wedding?" I didn't answer right away. Because the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me still loved him, or maybe loved who I thought he was. Part of me wanted to rip the veil in half, call every guest, and set fire to the whole charade. But another part, the colder, sharper part, wanted something more. I didn't just want out. I wanted him to feel it. So I asked Jess a different question. "Do you want to help me ruin him?" The silence on the other end turned into a slow, chilling laugh. "Tell me what you need." And just like that, the plan was born. I started with the guest list. I moved people around, rearranged the seating chart so that every person he respected, colleagues, family, even his pastor, would have a front row seat. I rewrote my vows. Not the ones I was going to say in front of the priest. The real ones. The ones that would come after. I contacted the hotel. The same one from the receipt. I asked for a copy of the invoice. Told them I was the bride-to-be and needed the information for a surprise slideshow at the reception. They didn't question it. When the email came through, I printed it on thick ivory paper, the same kind our wedding invitations were printed on. Then I bought a box. An elegant, white lacquered box with gold trim. Inside it, I placed the receipt, the photos I took from the car, and a small note that said, "For when you want to know what your husband was doing 2 weeks before saying I do." I wrapped it in silver ribbon and sealed it with a kiss. That box was for Mara. Because I'd done some digging. She wasn't just a fling. She was someone else's soon-to-be wife. Finding Mara wasn't hard. Ethan was sloppy. He might have hidden the affair from me, but he wasn't clever enough to cover his tracks completely. Her last name, Thompson, was on the hotel receipt. A quick search on social media narrowed it down. Her profile was public, filled with perfectly curated photos, yoga poses, latte art, travel shots from places I'd only dreamed of visiting. She had the kind of aesthetic that made you feel small and unpolished in comparison. And there he was, my Ethan, in 3 different photos, always tagged subtly, always with vague captions like "grateful for good company" or "surround yourself with people who inspire you." I wanted to vomit. But the real discovery came from a comment on one of her posts. It said, "Can't wait to see you in white, M. Hashtag countdown to Thebig Day." I clicked the commenter's profile. Another public account. A bridesmaid, apparently. I scrolled until I found what I needed, a photo of a bridal brunch with Mara wearing a white floral dress and a sash that read "Future Mrs. Whitaker." So not only was she cheating with my fiancé, she was also engaged to someone else. The level of hypocrisy was dizzying. These weren't 2 people swept up in a tragic, impulsive mistake. No. They were building 2 separate futures on the same lie. And I had 12 days to dismantle both. I wasn't reckless. I didn't send the box immediately. I waited. I wanted the timing to be perfect, to land like a bomb, not a warning shot. But I needed more ammunition. Something undeniable. Something that wouldn't just expose Ethan's betrayal, but devastate it. So I kept pretending. Playing house. I let him come home to me, kiss me, plan our honeymoon. We even did a cake tasting. I let him choose lemon raspberry. I nodded and smiled and told him it was perfect. Meanwhile, Jess was busy. She managed to find out that Mara's wedding was scheduled for the week after ours. A Sunday afternoon ceremony at a vineyard just outside Charleston. The same vineyard, in fact, where Ethan had proposed to me. That broke something in me. He didn't just cheat. He recycled the memory. Repackaged our most sacred moment and handed it to another woman like it was a coupon code. The day before our wedding, I stood in front of the mirror in my gown. It was beautiful. Ivory silk, delicate lace at the sleeves, buttons down the back that took forever to fasten. I looked like a bride. But I felt like a widow. A woman mourning the death of a life she thought was real. Jess came over that night. We drank wine and burned old photos, not the ones from the proposal or vacations, but the little ones. The everyday ones. Him brushing his teeth. Us making pancakes. Scout between us on the couch. Those were the ones that hurt the most. Not the staged happiness. The real, quiet joy. The kind that can't be faked, or so I thought. Before she left, Jess handed me the white box. She'd added something of her own, a handwritten timeline of every overlap between our wedding prep and their affair. Receipts, dates, restaurant check-ins. It was thorough. Cruel. Perfect. I took a deep breath, sealed it again, and wrote the final address on the top. It wasn't Mara's. It was her fiancé's. Because if anyone deserved to know the truth before saying "I do," it was him. The morning of our wedding arrived cloaked in irony. The sky was a cruel shade of blue, the kind of crisp, cloudless morning brides dream of. Birds chirped as if nothing in the world was broken. My mother buzzed around the bridal suite, misty-eyed and glowing, fixing my veil and rambling about how proud my late grandmother would be. I let her talk. I let her cry. I smiled when I had to. Because today wasn't a celebration, it was a reckoning. Jess and I had mailed the box 2 days earlier with overnight delivery. We tracked it obsessively, watched it land in Charleston, watched it get signed for. By him. I imagined his hands trembling as he opened it. I imagined Mara's face, the color draining, the panic rising. I imagined the confrontation. The shouting. The broken glass. I didn't feel guilty. I felt righteous. She stole something that was mine. So I returned the favor. Back at the venue, everything was a dream. White roses. Gold-rimmed glasses. Guests in pastel suits and sequin dresses. The air smelled like champagne and expectations. Everyone kept telling me how radiant I looked. And I did, not because I was happy, but because I was free. I'd spent 12 days sitting in the quiet horror of betrayal, and now I was standing in the eye of the storm, untouched, untouchable. When the music started, I walked down the aisle with my father. My legs were steady. My heart was calm. Ethan stood at the altar, looking every bit the part, hair neatly combed, tie perfectly straight, eyes full of something I couldn't quite place. Was it guilt? Nerves? Or did he really believe this was still going to happen? He smiled when he saw me. I didn't smile back. We stood there before the minister, hands joined, surrounded by people who had no idea they were about to witness a demolition. He began his vows first. They were beautiful. Poetic. Full of promises about forever, about building a life together, about never letting anything come between us. I let him finish. I let him believe he'd gotten away with it. And then I took a deep breath. My turn, I said. And I looked at him, really looked at him, into those eyes that used to make me feel safe, and I let the truth spill out. I loved you, I began. I believed in you. I built my life around you. But 2 weeks ago, I found a hotel receipt in our drawer. 2 nights in Charleston. With Mara Thompson. While I was on my bachelorette trip. You told me you were visiting your dad. You lied. The crowd gasped. Somewhere in the second row, I heard someone whisper, "Oh my God." My mother stood frozen. Just didn't blink. Ethan's face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I thought about canceling the wedding, I continued, my voice steady. But I realized you didn't just cheat on me, you betrayed every piece of trust one gave you. So I decided to let you walk into this day, this moment, thinking everything was fine. Just like I did. I pulled a small envelope from my bouquet and handed it to him. This is a copy of what I sent to Mara's fiancé. I thought he deserved the truth too. The silence was deafening. I stepped back, turned to the minister, and said clearly, "I do not." Then I walked away. Out of the chapel. Out of the lie. Out of the life I thought I wanted. And I didn't look back. The first few steps outside the chapel felt like walking into another world. My heels sank slightly into the grass, and the wind caught my veil, tugging it back like it didn't want me to leave. I let it go. Let the wind take it. Let the image of the blushing bride be carried off like a lie whispered into the sky. People shouted my name. My mother's voice cracked as she called after me. But I didn't stop. I didn't turn around. I kept walking until I reached the gravel driveway and pulled the pins from my hair one by one, like I was peeling off armor. Jess was already waiting by the car. She'd known I wouldn't stay. The passenger door was open. The engine was running. She said nothing, just handed me a bottle of water and a pair of flats. I kicked off my heels without hesitation. When we pulled away, the chapel shrank in the rearview mirror like a bad memory finally disappearing. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was full of release, of shock, of something that tasted almost like peace. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from family, friends, Ethan. I didn't read a single one. I turned the phone off and dropped it into the glove compartment like it was toxic. We drove for hours. No destination. Just away. It wasn't until we reached the coast, some sleepy beach town where no one knew my name, that we stopped. Checked into a quiet little inn with peeling paint and a sea breeze that cut through the stale wedding perfume still clinging to my skin. Jess didn't ask questions. She ordered takeout, found a bottle of red wine, and we ate on the floor, watching bad reality TV and laughing like we were 17 again. At some point that night, after the wine had softened the edges of my pain, I finally cried. Not because I missed him. Not because I regretted what I did. I cried because I had loved him. With everything I had. With a heart so open, so trusting that it never once imagined he'd turn it into a target. I cried for the girl who believed in promises. I cried for the wedding dress that would never be worn again. I cried for the version of my life I'd have to bury piece by piece. And when I woke up the next morning, eyes swollen, makeup smeared, something had shifted. Not healed, no, not yet. But cracked open just enough for the light to start creeping in. We stayed there for 3 days. No phones. No emails. Just ocean, sleep, and silence. On the second day, I took a long walk by myself. I watched couples holding hands, kids chasing gulls, and old man building a sandcastle alone. I sat on the shore until the tide kissed my feet, and I wrote something in the sand. You were not the end of me. Then I stood up and let the water wash it away. Because I didn't need to prove it anymore. I was already becoming someone new. When I returned to Charlotte, the silence was waiting for me like an old friend. Our apartment, his apartment now, I suppose, was still exactly as I had left it, pristine, untouched, curated like a catalog spread. The wedding gifts stacked in the corner were a cruel reminder of what was supposed to be. I didn't unpack. I didn't sit down. I walked straight to the bedroom, opened the closet, and started pulling out every trace of him, every shirt, every belt, every pair of perfectly polished shoes. I didn't tear things. I didn't burn anything. I just laid them all neatly on the bed like a museum display of a man I no longer knew. I texted him just once, "Your things are here. I'll be gone by tomorrow." He responded within minutes, paragraphs of shock, anger, panic, apologies. Promises that it meant nothing, that he was lost, that he still wanted a life with me. I didn't reply. What was there to say? He hadn't just broken my heart. He had insulted it. Mocked it. Used my love as a mask while he built a life behind my back. I found a new apartment the next day, smaller, quieter, with creaky floors and too much sunlight in the mornings. It was perfect. It was mine. I started over slowly. The first week, I bought myself a set of dishes that didn't match. I painted one wall blue just because I could. I got a dog, not like Scout, the golden retriever he insisted on, but a scrappy little mutt named Dobby who followed me around like he was afraid I'd vanish. People started reaching out. Friends who had been at the wedding, stunned by what I'd done. Some were supportive. Some were awkward. A few were judgmental, cloaking their criticism in concern. I didn't care. Because the truth was, I'd done what most people only fantasize about. I'd chosen myself, even when it was messy. Even when it was humiliating. Even when it shattered everything familiar. I heard through a mutual friend that Mara's wedding had been canceled. That her fiancé had received the box just in time. There was a scene. A screaming match. Guests turned away at the gate. She moved out of their shared condo 3 days later. No one knows where she went. Ethan, I was told, took some time off work. Said he needed to process. He tried to contact me again, letters this time, long-winded confessions about childhood wounds and fear of commitment. I read the first one. It ended with maybe someday we can talk. I threw it in the trash. Because I didn't need closure. I had truth. I had silence. And more importantly, I had peace. Time doesn't heal everything. That's a lie people tell to make the waiting hurt less. What time does, if you're lucky, is create space. Space between the trauma and your breath. Space between the wound and the life you still deserve to live. And in that space, slowly, you begin to remember who you were before the breaking. Or maybe, if you're even luckier, you begin to discover who you were always meant to be. In the months that followed, I stopped counting how many days it had been since the wedding that wasn't. I stopped checking his social media. I stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd confronted him earlier, if I'd never found the receipt, if I just kept pretending. Regret is a seductive trap. It makes you feel like there was some version of the past where everything worked out. But there wasn't. Not with him. I went back to therapy. I told my therapist everything. She didn't flinch. She didn't coddle. She just listened, really listened, in the way I hadn't been listened to in years. We talked about self-worth, about trust, about why love that feels familiar isn't always love that's safe. I admitted something I hadn't even said out loud to Jess. Part of me had known. Not the whole truth, not the affair, but that something was broken. That something about our love felt conditional. Performed. Like I was always one misstep away from being too much or not enough. That kind of love is exhausting. And addictive. But I was detoxing now. And it hurt. But it also felt like living again. Jess stayed close. She checked in without hovering. She made me laugh when I needed to cry and told me when I was wallowing too long. We went out again, to bars, to bookstores, to late-night diners with greasy fries and too loud music. She never once said, "I told you so," even though she could have. She just stayed. Loyal. Present. Real. And then one night, almost 6 months to the day after the wedding, I met someone new. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't fireworks. It wasn't even romantic at first. It was a conversation about books, of all things. At a used bookstore. We reached for the same copy of East of Eden, and instead of pulling away, he smiled and said, "Great choice. You take it." His name was Caleb. He was quiet, thoughtful, wore glasses that slid down his nose, and talked about Steinbeck like he was an old friend. We got coffee. Then more coffee. Then dinner. Then long walks with no destination. He never asked about my past. He let me tell it when I was ready. And when I did every raw, brutal detail, he didn't try to fix it. He just said, "That shouldn't have happened to you. But I'm glad you walked away." I didn't fall in love right away. But I felt safe. And that was new. Looking back now, a year later, I sometimes wonder who I would have become if I'd gone through with it. If I had married Ethan. If I had chosen to overlook the signs, swallow my doubt, and walk down that aisle pretending that love could survive betrayal. I think about the version of me that would have existed, quiet, uncertain, shrinking herself to keep the illusion alive. And I feel nothing but gratitude for the woman who stood at that altar and chose truth over comfort, self-respect over tradition, pain over performance. It wasn't easy. God, it wasn't easy. There were nights I woke up sweating, hearing echoes of his voice. Days when a familiar cologne on a stranger would make my stomach twist. There were moments, fleeting, sharp, when I missed him. Not the real him. The idea of him. The version I'd built in my head, brick by careful brick, only to watch it collapse under the weight of his lies. But those moments pass now. Quicker. Softer. Because the woman I became, the one who walked away in a white dress without ever looking back, she's still here. She shops for mismatched mugs. She reads poetry in the bath. She dances barefoot in her apartment with Dobby wagging his tail. She's rebuilding, not from scratch, but from strength. And Caleb? He's still here too. He doesn't ask for pieces of me I'm not ready to give. He doesn't flinch when I pull back, doesn't push when I hesitate. He leaves notes in books I haven't opened yet, like little promises waiting to be discovered. With him, there's no performance. No test. No pedestal. Just space sacred and safe to be exactly who I am, wounds and all. Sometimes people ask if I hate Ethan. If I'd go back and undo it all if I could. My answer surprises them. No. I don't hate him. Not anymore. And no, I wouldn't change a thing. Because that betrayal, as cruel and calculated as it was, gave me something I'd never had before, the freedom to choose myself. I used to think the worst thing that could happen was being left at the altar. Now I know the worst thing would have been staying. So here I am. Not bitter. Not broken. Just free. And that in the end is the real love story.